Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I am your host, and today we're going to be talking about lead. We're not going to be talking necessarily about lead in chocolate, but we're going to be talking about lead in protein powder. And so if we're not talking about chocolate, why are we talking about lead in protein powder? Because we're going to be talking about consumer reports and their long-standing apparent love affair for reporting about lead contamination in particular, and heavy metals contamination more generally in baby food and chocolate and cocoa products, and now in protein powder. But before we get to today's episodes, just a quick note. This episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode, is sponsored by the members of The Chocolate Life. You can go to the homepage of The Chocolate Life, and this is the homepage live, and you can click on the green button at the top. It'll say join, and you can become a member of The Chocolate Life. There's always a free member tier. You can just join free, but if you do have the resources to support The Chocolate Life financially, there are premium member tiers, many of which come with coaching and consulting hours that you can use to help grow your business, answer questions about marketing, whatever it is. You could ask me anything about cocoa or chocolate. And the higher the premium tier, the more consulting hours that there are. I also want to point out that you can go into the comments, whether you're looking at the live chat in YouTube or the comments in LinkedIn or Facebook. You can give me a shout out. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from. And then you can also ask questions or leave comments, and I will get them all up on screen. And I will do my best to, number one, I will give you a shout out. And then number two is I will do my best to answer them during the course of the episode. And with that, let's get started by pointing out that for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I create a post. And this is the post for today's episode. And this post, among other things, provides me with a run of show, right? It's not a script per se. It's just going to give me, it's going to give me the talking points and the points in order that I'm going to talk about. But before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the overlay here and display a QR code. If you're watching on a computer and you'd like to follow along on your phone, you can scan the QR code and it will open up the this post. It will open up this post on your phone and you can follow along. So let's go take a look. All right. So the first thing I want to do is establish a little bit of history. And I am going to zoom this up a bit. Right, so it's a little more visible, is that in 2018, and I realize there's a typo there. I'll fix that after the fact. In 2018, Consumer Reports posted a report about heavy metals contamination in baby foods. Right? Now, what does that look like? So here's the original reports, heavy metals in baby food, what you need to know about arsenic, cadmium, and lead in popular baby foods, and scroll down and scroll down and scroll down. And it's actually an interesting read, and it's not really sensationalistic. I will point that. What I do disagree with, and that's one of the things I'm going to talk about, is the methodology that they used in both the cocoa and chocolate studies as well as the protein powder studies. And I want to help make you a better, which is more skeptical, more critical reader of the information. So how can you go about doing that? What are the things that I do, right? When I look at this and I go, does that make sense or not? But notice that in this post, this special report, lead and cadmium could be in your dark chocolate, was not part of the original post in 2018. This lead and cadmium post didn't show up until 2022. So you do need to pay attention as you're reading these things, because not everything is going to be obvious in what it is that is being written. All right. So in 2023, and then again later in October, and they did write a report. So we're roughly the 2-year anniversary. And if there is one topic that I have had to discuss over the course of the last 2 years since this article approached, on Reddit and social media, all sorts of places, there's one topic I've had to address. And this includes in my AMA talks in front of live audiences. It's this question: is chocolate bad for you? do I need to worry about lead and cadmium? And the modern trigger for that question is this article. This article went viral. It was reported all over the place. And again, you need to be very, very careful about how you go about reviewing this article. You need to go read it. And while, again, it may not be entirely sensationalistic, there are aspects of it which, right, I disagree with, to a great level. You do need to be a critical and skeptical reader of it, right? And so there was this 2023 guide. There was a 2025 update to this, right? And recently there was a new article which talked about protein powder and protein enhanced shakes. And that's really the focus of what it is that I want to talk about today, is talk about that article, that reporting, and then to go, what are some of the things that we can learn about this? And are there any things that we can bring in from the reporting that was done on cocoa and chocolate that we can see what the correlations are, right? That might inform the reporting on protein powder and protein shakes. Right? So before we get into taking a look at that, again, there's a link to this post. If you want to read the post on Consumers Reports, there's a link to it, and you can go read it. You can read it along, or you can read it after the fact when you get there. So first of all, what I want to do is I want to create a background here. A lot of this, in my opinion, a lot of Consumer Reports reporting, right, is based upon what are called MADLs, which is the maximum allowable dose level, which are set under California's Proposition 65. Right? So Proposition 65 requires manufacturers to put warnings on products which have chemicals in them or other risks associated with them, which are above a certain level. Right? And so when we look at, for example, lead specifically, California, the OEHHA, the Office of Health Assessment Hazard, says that the maximum allowable dose level for lead is 5 micrograms per day. And that level was set in 1989. Now, since the original reporting from Consumer Reports landed, Chocolate Life member Keith Ayub. So Keith is a pediatric nutritionist. He's associated with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. He's not an epidemiologist, which would be another helpful discipline to talk about this. But Keith has come on a number of times, and he and I have collaborated on a number of episodes of Pod Save Chocolate or The Chocolate Life Live, depending on the timing of things. And we've also co-authored, or Keith has authored a number of articles. So if you want to learn more about Keith, you can click on his profile, right? And you can learn more about what it is that he's done, as well as the articles that he's contributed to, right? So I thank Keith a great deal for that. Now, I also want to say that when we look at these posts on The Chocolate Life, so cadmium in chocolate, cadmium 2.0, the irresponsible demonization of cadmium. Cadmium is shorthand for heavy metals contamination. It includes lead, not just cadmium. And one of the things which is interesting about this protein powder analysis, that it also includes arsenic and mercury, as well as 15 other elements. So there's an expansion of what they're doing. But one of the things, so you can go through, again, I'm not going to go over these in great detail. If you want to, the episode of Pod Save Chocolate is about an hour long, or The Chocolate Life Live is about an hour long. The articles are somewhere under 10 minutes read a piece. I mean, there's a great deal of background there. I don't want to rehash all of that right now. It's there, although what it is that I say in those articles is a part of my responses today, right? And so let's go down and go take a look at it. And so Et2, right? Et2 protein powder is a reference to even you, Brutus, Et2 Brute. So we're going to talk about even you protein powder, right? And protein powder contaminated with heavy metals, what's that all about, right? And so Excuse me, that is my daughter, who's one of the few people who are allowed to get through my do not disturb notice. Anyway, so I when I posted this yesterday, I asked a very, very specific question. And that question was, what protein source is most associated with elevated levels of heavy metals in protein powders and shakes? And nobody answered the question in the comments. But before I answer that question, what I do want to do is I do want to talk about a really critical component as we go forward in taking a look at this, right? And that critical component is really understanding the difference between hazard and risk, right? What is so something that could be hazardous, how risky is it? Or something that is risky, how hazardous is it? So just very, very quickly, and I'm going to read through them, but I think, keep these definitions in mind as we move forward. The first one of which is a hazard is the inherent property or situation, right, that can cause adverse effects, right? So like lead in cocoa powder or a wet floor, right? Or let's see, traffic when crossing a street. These are hazards. Risk, right, is the combination of how likely that harm is to occur and how serious the consequences will be. So, for example, using the crossing the street analogy, crossing the street is hazardous. Traffic going either direction, right? We manage the risk associated with that by doing things like putting up stop signs, putting up traffic lights, and just the simple expedient of I stop and I look both ways to determine if there's any oncoming traffic. So it's very, very hazardous to cross streets where traffic is going at very high rates of speeds, but we've learned to manage the risk, right? Is there a hazard associated with consuming lead in chocolate and cocoa? The answer is yes. Do we manage that risk? The answer is yes. And the question is how we manage the risk and what are the consequences of not managing the risk versus managing it appropriately. Really, really important way, really important concept to think about and to just in your brain. And it's one that you can associate with many, 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 many topics that you're going to run into in your daily life. And as you read news reports, you look at something and go, oh, that seems really bad, but what are the consequences of that happening and what is the likelihood of it happening? And you can now say, well, yeah, it may be hazarded, but I don't think it's risky behavior, or it's a risky situation, or it's a risky thing at all. Really important to understand the difference. So you can think of it as this way. Hazard answers what could go wrong, and risk answers how likely is it to happen and how bad are the consequences going to be. So what could go wrong versus how likely and how bad are the consequences. Just real shorthand. So talking points, which I added this morning. And I want to say that I spent a lot more time working on all of these points this morning than I had originally anticipated, because as I got into it, I realized, oh, I need to talk about this, and then I need to talk about this, and oh, here's something else I need to bring in, and all this kind of stuff. So I ended up spending a lot more time on the update this morning than I did in writing the original post for it. So number one, first thing I want to say is I am not a doctor and I am not a lawyer. I am not here to give you medical advice or legal advice. I am just here presenting my opinion on the report or of the report. Just really quick, right? I just want to make that disclaimer right up front. Number two, I do want to let you know that I understand that there is no such thing as a no observed adverse effects level when it comes to consuming lead. Right? It has been shown epidemiologically, clinically, that even consuming very, very small amounts of lead can have adverse effects in the body. Right? And so just really, really important to know that. And it's important to know there's no agreed upon level. So depending upon which authority that you're talking to and how they measure things and how they report things, there are some slight quibbles about that. But basically, it says lead is no good, right? So we need to be very careful. The important thing to know about that is that lead is toxic to some level, even when you consume it in small quantities. And number two is the body is really, really bad about eliminating lead that it is absorbed and metabolized in some way, right? So, um, so that means that the effects of lead consumption are cumulative, right? So you might have very, very small amounts, but very, very small amounts over a very long period of time can build up. And even though a single a single exposure might not be horrible for you, right, over a long period of time, it will build up. And things like solar radiation. If you go out and you get a minute of sunlight today, it's not going to be that bad. But if you have a minute of sunlight this hour, and depending on the time of day, cumulative effects of sunlight exposure over long periods of time can lead to adverse effects like skin cancer. So it's a very, very similar. You need to be very, very careful about that, right? It's also important to understand, what does Consumer Reports hope to achieve with what it is that they're doing, right? And one of the things they want to do is they want to influence the federal government, the FDA, to develop regulatory guidelines. They want to say, when it comes to protein powder and protein shakes, you need to be much more careful in terms of what can be in them. I think that's the primary goals. Secondarily, I think, unfortunately, what's going to happen, or one of the things that we need to be concerned about, is that the companies who were mentioned in the study are now on notice, right? And if the products that they have been selling are above the California MADLs, they may be at risk for class action lawsuits, right? As a side effect of what it is that's going on. So if the company has been selling a product that has been shown to be high in lead for some time in California, and there was no Proposition 65 warning on the label, or maybe even if there was a Prop 65 warning on the label, then somebody who could say, "Oh my gosh, I've been consuming a serving of this protein powder every day for every day I go to the gym for the last 2 years," then they might say, "Oh, I'm you know I'm at risk for something associated with my consumption of lead." The challenge of that is going to be, well, and number one, anybody can sue anybody about anything, unfortunately, here in the US. But the one challenge is that it will be important. Number one is that you have to demonstrate that there was harm. So if lead can reduce IQ, how do you show that, oh, here was my IQ 2 years ago, and now my IQ is lower, and that's directly correlated, or it's not directly correlated, but it was caused by my consumption of this particular product because it contains lead. So while it is possible to sue, and it's a class action, it would be possible to sue, the challenge is going to be demonstrating causation and harm, and that's a very, very high bar to jump over. Won't stop people from trying. They tried to do it when the reports about heavy metals contamination in chocolate came out. There were a number of lawsuits in California and in New York, if I recall correctly, where people were saying, "Oh my gosh, you were selling me products which were to some extent poisonous or hazardous," right? And this is where the difference between hazard and risk needs to be. They were hazardous, but were they risky, right? Needs to be formulated. So going back to the first question that I did, the TLDR, what protein source most associated with elevated heavy levels of heavy metals in protein powder shakes is peas. Peas, those little legumes, the little green things that we love to hate. Peas are the protein source which is most associated with elevated levels of heavy metals in protein powders and protein shakes. So, right, it's a plant protein. And so why are people using pea protein as opposed to, for example, soy protein? There are a lot of GM soy, so people may want to avoid soy because it is in fact GM. But the other point is that in formulations, and this is something I know from personal experience, it is much more difficult to create a tasty product with a good texture using soy-based protein isolates as opposed to pea-based protein isolates. So more and more people are using peas because they don't taste as bad and it's easier to put into formulations. So that's why peas are the protein source that in this study is most associated with heavy metals contamination. So what are some of the study goals? Right? These are quoted directly from the study. So the study goals to evaluate the quality, safety, and associated health risks, which they didn't do, right? So they didn't say this one tastes better if that's a quality. I don't know. I don't think they talked about quality. I don't recall that quality was defined and then how it was put into their results. But they wanted to evaluate the quality, safety, and associated health risks of commercially available protein supplements by determining the levels of protein, right? The levels of heavy metals in arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury, and 19 other additional elements. I said 19 earlier, 23 in total, right? Note, right, because if you're not looking carefully, you can overlook it. And what I want to do very, very quickly is switch to this, which is the report. So I don't think that I link to this report. I will do that, but you can get this report from this post, right, which is linked to. So here is the post on protein powders, and you can link to the methodology and download it yourself, right? But so I'm getting the text that I referred to directly from the test methodology. And the test methodology is exactly 4 pages long, including nearly 2 full pages of results. So in terms of really understanding the methodology, I think it's an incomplete description in order to understand what's going on. All right. Right. So again, something that's, you might overlook, but when I was looking at the table, I was going, why are they doing this way? It made sense when I went back and reread that they tested for inorganic arsenic only when the test results for total arsenic exceeded our level of concern. Right? So neither mercury nor the 19 other elements we tested were detected at or above levels of concern in any of the products. So there is no reporting on that because all of them were determined to be of no concern according to Consumer Reports, which is where we need to go to point 6 is Consumer Reports level of concern is essentially synonymous with a California MADL, the maximum allowable dose level. So they just want to personalize it and say, ooh, we've come up with this and it's our whatsoever, right? It's as a result of our research. And if it appears to be no different from the California MADL, but they just want to take ownership in a way which is not necessarily something that they can take ownership of, but they express it as our level of concern as opposed to the California MADL. So, right. So now I wanted to get into a couple of things that I associate with the methodology. And point number 1 is obfuscation by over/under explanation, right? And so what does that mean? So if we go take a look at this, what we're going to do is we're going to find on page 1 that we've got the EPA reference amount here is in micrograms per kilogram body weight, right? But here we have everything is in the OEHA. This is the California Occupational Health or Health and Hazards. I forget what it is exactly. The maximum allowable dose level is in micrograms per day. The FDA is in micrograms per day. The FDA is in micrograms per day, right? But what we do is we go down to the post, and what we find is parts per billion, and then 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 parts per billion. And the answer is why? Why are they adding this column of parts per billion, right? When parts per billion is not a part of their health-based exposure limits, right? It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And all I could say is that, ooh, it makes the table fuller and there's more data there and it looks more impressive, right? And it's a problem. So they're over explaining things, right, as a way to obfuscate, as a way to make it more difficult to get the information that is really valuable to you. So that's number one, right? Methodology number two, obfuscation by splitting attention, right? So what does that mean? So here are the health-based exposure limits, and then they're on page one. And then I have to go to page three, and oh, what do these mean? I have to go back to page one, and then I'm here on page four, and I need to go back to page one. There is no reason why a version of this table couldn't be put in either the header or the footer of every single page, or it could be incorporated into the table if I got rid of the parts per billion columns. There are 3 columns here, or there are 4 columns here, all right, but I could get rid of it, parts per billion, parts per billion, parts per billion. I can get rid of columns, and now I have room for at least some sort of explanatory data right there where I can do the comparison. So that's, going back and forth, right? And going back and forth, right? I hope you understand. The human nervous system is not designed to do that kind of comparison. We're really good at comparing things that are side by side, but I have to go from one page of a document and then remember something, and then go to another page of document and concentrate on something. It's really easy to lose track of what was on the first page, right? So it's obfuscation. Is it deliberate? I don't know. I don't know who designed this, but it does make reading this report much more difficult because you have to go back and forth. Right. Point 3 in the methodology, the results of the table are presented in alphabetical order, right? The report title, Protein Powders and Shakes Contain High Levels of Lead, is lead-centric, so it makes more sense to me to order the table based on highest to lowest in lead contamination, right? And here's another aspect of that obfuscation, right? So it's all about lead, right? And there are only 23, and so putting this in alphabetical order makes some sense. But here's an interesting thing, is even though the report is lead-centric, what they did is they ordered the test results, again, by alphabetical order, right? And what they did is that they printed it in black and white, right? And so there's no way to know that, oh, green means these are good and red means these are bad. There's no color coding here, right? So you need to know what this all means very, very closely in a very, very detailed, and go back and forth. And why are they doing arsenic first and devoting 4 columns of this to 2 columns for lead? It is just astonishing to me, right, that the results are this badly designed, right? There's a lot of information I don't care about, right? And it's not actually organized in ways that make sense to me, right? If lead is it does say heavy metals contamination in protein, but the report is high levels of lead, right? The results are all about, arsenic first, right? So again, it's obfuscation, right? Because the reports that we care about are way over here. They're in, not column 1 or column 2 or column 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. They're in columns 8 or 9. That's what we came here for. Anyway, am I being nitpicking? I spent a couple of years while I was a student at Rhode Island School of Design. And a couple of years, most of the first 20 years of my career, all of the 20 years of my career in information technology, high technology, concerned about the presentation of data. If you are interested in these topics, go take a look at Edward Tufte's book, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. That's an excellent introductory textbook on how you can hide things by obfuscation and how you can make really terrible decisions, right? If the data are in fact not presented in a way that hides hidden relationships. So let's go there. This is why I'm a real stickler for it. You gotta take care of that and understand it. So next point, right? One of the things that they don't do, right, is there's no attempt to determine what percentage of the amount of lead is due to any chocolate ingredient. So 12 of the 23 samples have chocolate in them. Most of the others are vanilla. There might be 1 or 2 unflavored, but 12 of the 23 samples, over half of the samples, are chocolate flavored. And there's no attempt, I mean, there's no, oh, this has got chocolate in it, right? There's no discussion of, oh, could the chocolate component be a contributing factor to this? Now, is that important? It's a datum that I would have liked them to at least address, right? By saying, from their methodology point of view, from a methodology point of view, that whole assessment of what might be the contribution of the chocolate component, right, is really, really challenging, because they would have had to individually test all of the cocoa containing ingredient independently, separately. So they would have had to say, okay, here's the chocolate flavored protein powder, and here's its lead content, and here's the chocolate ingredient, and here's its lead content, and we can say this is how much is attributable to the protein component, and here's how much is attributable to the cocoa component, right? It would require the manufacturers to identify the specific ingredient they used for the chocolate flavoring. But one thing that's interesting to know is that cocoa, ironically, right? Cocoa often contains many elements that inhibit the metabolism of lead. So are there any elements that are in the pea protein that inhibit the metabolism of lead? Because again, we're talking about hazard and risk. Yes, there may be high amounts of lead in some of these products, but as a risk, they're not all that risky. And that's the point that is entirely missing. What they're saying is that our assessment is that any level of hazard, right, is risk, right? And they are directly comparable, when in fact they may be not. And that's the point to make. So 12 of the 23 samples are chocolate containing. There's no discussion. Even from the methodology, we didn't assess the contribution of the cocoa component, because there was no way to get at the cocoa ingredient independently, separately test. I get it, but there's no discussion of it. And I'm thinking from a rigorous analysis point of view, that would be a point that would have made an enormous amount of sense for them to discuss, right? So going back to this as part of the methodology, point number 5, there is no discussion of common co-founding factors here, right? So number 1, there are certain genetic conditions and diseases that contribute to the metabolism and storage of ingested lead. So you might have an inherited condition. You might have a particular, you might have a kidney malfunction, there might be a liver malfunction. There could be something going on, right? Which is making it more difficult for your body to eliminate ingested lead, right? And so it is stored in the bones and other organs, right? So there's no discussion of confounding factors in this when it comes to the risk part of the assessment. We all agree that lead is a hazard. Are you at risk? And it turns out that genetic conditions and diseases are confounding factors, which may contribute, right, to what's going on. It's also the fact that certain elements, when consumed at the same time as foods containing lead, inhibit lead metabolism. So, for example, in the case of cocoa and chocolate, I believe I pointed out in this link that, dark chocolate contains significant levels of copper, iron, manganese, magnesium, and zinc that also restrict the bioavailability of cadmium and lead. And what's interesting about this, and now that I'm talking through it, it makes sense, is that, remember, it pointed out in the study goals, neither mercury nor the 19 other elements we tested were detected at or above levels of concern. Well, they only checked for levels of concern. They didn't check, there are significant amounts of chemicals which are known to inhibit the metabolism of lead. And that would have been really interesting. This one is high in these elements which are known to inhibit. Right? Again, it's the methodology is focused entirely. It appears to me that the methodology is focused so inherently on hazard and equating hazard 1-to-1 with risk that it just completely misses a bunch of other really, really important aspects of this. I mean, a third aspect, a third confounding factor is going to be age. Young children are more at risk, so babies are more at risk than adults. And there are other things with that, like, I'm not likely to get pregnant if I'm 3 months old. I would say it was probably impossible to become pregnant if I was 3 months old. And I realized that there is another typo here, which I'll need to fix. But that's one. And the other one is body weight. It assumes that somebody who weighs 30 pounds, 15 kilograms, 33 pounds is at the same risk as somebody who weighs 70 kilograms. And that may not be true, right? It depends upon what we're risk. Are we looking for a risk at like things which might have to do with brain development? It may be true that it doesn't matter what your body weight is, but there doesn't appear to be any discussion, right, of these confounding factors in the methodology which was presented in the report. And I believe that that's an oversight. All right. There's no discussion of the relative risks of arsenic, cadmium, and lead. So if I go look at the table here, and there's no explanation, for example, about what the difference is in between organic arsenic and inorganic arsenic. Which one is more toxic to the body? I mean, I know the answer to that question, but all right, do you know? Do you know which is more toxic? Right, right, organic or inorganic arsenic. So there's that, and right, which is more toxic? Right, if something has got low levels of lead but high levels of arsenic, or vice versa, how do I go about navigating those two things? Or just say it's high, it doesn't matter what it's high in, I'm just not going to do it. There's not a whole lot of guidance on understanding the balance of those things. So again, it's I'm looking at the methodology document. There's no discussion of these things, and so they're discussing what they tested, sort of what they're testing for, but they're not really talking about and again, any of the confounding or mitigating factors which associate risk and hazard and the difference between the two, which is why I brought them up at the very beginning. So, gotcha. All right. So going back to my bullet point list, right, there is a blanket assertion which is made in the methodology that plants take in lead from the soil. And in my looking that up, what I learned that blanket assertion is incomplete, right? So here's the results of some of my, these are from articles, so peer-reviewed scientific research article, which are published in sources like PubMed, right, which is part of the National Institutes of Health, right? So number one, plants do take up lead from the soil and water via their roots. Some is translocated to shoots and grains, with cereal crops showing measurable seed grain accumulation, though most lead remains in roots. So peas are legumes. Is it a seed or a grain? Right. I would need to go look at that classification. Is it a cereal? I don't think it is. It's a legume, not a cereal. So I don't think they are the same thing. But plants take up lead from the soil, right, from water via their roots, and some is translocated. Some does move to shoots and grains, with cereal showing measurable seed grain accumulation. The most lead remains in the roots. So when it says plants take up lead from the soil, technically true, but it doesn't say most of that lead remains in the roots, which is disingenuous, perhaps. Is it obfuscatory? Perhaps. Is it deliberate? No way to know. I am not asserting any kind of motivation to this. It is an incomplete description of what is going on, right? And there's no reason why the methodology has to be 4 pages, right? It's a PDF. They can make it as long as they want. We're not burning trees, right? We're not cutting down trees in order to put it on paper, right? So that's the one thing. Number two, another bit of research that says movement into seeds is biologically plausible and empirically observed. Okay, so it does get into seeds, although typically a smaller fraction than root retention. So here's another research study that says, yeah, plants take up lead into the roots, but a small fraction of it, or a smaller fraction of it, or only a portion of it goes from the roots into something that we might eat, right? So again, plants take up lead from the soil is an incomplete assertion, right? And then it goes on, again, a third study that says, at a population level, Dietary exposure assessments support seed grain contribution. Okay. EFSA is the European Food Safety Association. Their risk evaluations consistently find that cereal products are among the largest contributors to lead intake, indicating measurable occurrence in edible grains for agriculture system. So you're more likely to be subjected to high levels of lead in whole wheat bread, right, where the wheat was grown in soils that have the conditions which support uptake of lead, right? So we're thinking about pea protein. That's an issue. It's not a cereal grain, right? But if you're worried about pea protein and you eat a lot of whole wheat bread, maybe you should be concerned about whole wheat bread, right? And it also, we'll get to that, but that's it's just important. This doesn't mean that seeds concentrate the majority of plant lead. Roots usually hold more, but it does confirm the lead can reach and accumulate in seed grains that are relevant at levels relevant for human diets, right? And again, separate bit of research, there are many confounding factors in the uptake, including the acidity of the soil pH, the species of the plant that we're talking about, the soil microbiome, mycorrhizae, and other aspects of the soil are going to inhibit might inhibit lead uptake. Environmental deposition, which means, oh, if I live next to a civil aviation airport where there are lots of small planes, propeller driven, they're still using lead in their aviation gas. And so if I live near an airport, chances are the clouds are going to settle, or not clouds, but the exhaust from the planes is going to settle on things. That's one aspect of environmental deposition. Another aspect of environmental deposition might be soil that was contaminated before lead was removed from gasoline, and we're now doing a construction project, and there's a lot of dust, which contains lead, which gets put up in the air, and it becomes redeposited onto things. So the question is it plant uptake? Is it environmental contamination? Is not something that's discussed at all. It just say plants take up lead. Now, animals eat plants, right? And so what is the process by which, oh, if I'm using whey protein, there's not much lead in whey protein. Why? If cows are eating plants? No discussion, right? Just say plants take in lead. Again, incomplete. So what I wanted to do is I also went through and did a little bit of research, and I said, what are the top exposure vectors? That's this column here, exposure vector, for lead, right? If I'm a human walking around, what are the top exposure vectors for lead? And then what I said is, what is the explanation? What is the risk explanation? So the number one environmental exposure vector for lead is lead-based paint and household dust in pre-1978 housing. So lead was removed from paint formulations in the late 1970s. But if somebody, for example, if you're doing a whole house demo of a home that was built in the 1960s or 1970s, chances are it has lead-based paint, and you need to be very, very careful because you might expose, even though the walls may have been painted over several times, when you break the walls, you expose the initial lead surface or the initial paint surface, which might contain lead, and it can become aerosolized or in powder form, right? And it can travel anywhere on the wind, right? So that's the number one source. I did ask that the results be ranked in terms of likelihood, right? Right. So number one is lead-based paint and household dust in pre-1978 housing, right? So even if you are in fact, you live in an apartment building that was built a long time ago, even though most of the surfaces may have painted in lead, again, if somebody is doing construction and they're breaking through the walls or things like that, lead might be dispersed through the air. Important fact. Number two, drinking water, right? Here in the United States, we think of Flint, Michigan, right? But it turns out that drinking water from lead service lines, fixtures, and solder. This is, again, probably older, right? But if you're concerned about this, you need to go talk to your local municipality and find out, are there any lead pipes, right, which lead to my home. And then you need to go figure out, are there any lead pipes in my home, which might be leaching lead into the water that I drink every day. It's a problem. You can filter most of it out. But if you don't have a filter, you do need to worry about it. And corrosion from, um, from contaminants that show up as total dissolved solids, right, can corrode the pipes and leach it at a faster rate. You do need to be careful. Number one. Number three, legacy contaminated soil. So I did talk about that. We're doing construction and we're digging deep, and we find we're digging through a layer where the surface was exposed in the 1960s, 1970s, and there's lots of lead from the gas of cars and trucks and airplanes. Then we can disturb it, and it will be put up into the air, and it will go all over the place. So those are the three highest vectors for environmental exposure to lead. So then we have consumer food products, right, are the next, right? All right. So on in the top five, food is the fourth most common environmental vector for exposures, right? And then number five is jobs and hobbies. So there are some specific jobs and hobbies where there's this concept of take-home lead. So you're exposed to this, it gets on your clothes, and you bring it into your home, right? So I just wanted to go talk about this. When you talk about hazard and risk, there is a list of hazards. There's a list of the risks for each one of those things. A detailed explanation of remediation is beyond the scope of this, right? I also wanted to put together a table of foods. So we're focused on pea protein, we're focused on cocoa powder, and all this other kind of stuff. Let's put together, right, a list of foods you might want to be concerned about, right? Which is one of this is turmeric. So I'm thinking, I don't think any of the protein powders or protein shakes are golden yellow. That golden is almost always from the turmeric, right? But the turmeric can be, oh man. So what happens is there's a reported column here, the second one, and then a normalized. So they're reported in different weights and measures and scales, and I tried to get everything into micrograms per kilogram. It says milligrams here, and I realized that milligrams per kilogram. I take that back because there's a microgram here. So number one, turmeric, right? If you're worried about lead consumption, be very, very, and you drink a lot of golden lattes and golden shakes and this or the other, or do a lot of yellow rice and things like that, where the coloring comes from the turmeric, right? You need to be extremely concerned. You're more likely to blow out your blow through your lead limit with a very small amount of turmeric. And just so relative concerns. How do we normalize the risk from protein powder or protein shakes with something like turmeric, which is in our spice cabinet, right? You need to think about that. Number two on the list is protein powders, protein shakes. So what did I do? I went through and I did a search for common lead levels, which have been reported in these things. And then I said, go look at the table in the Consumer Reports article and pull out the lead levels from there, average them up, and put them into this one table. So number three, cinnamon, right? So cinnamon is, oh man, milligrams per, you could have a tablespoon of cinnamon as a way to, because you're doing some diet where you need to use cinnamon for quote unquote regulate blood sugar, for example. It's thought to do that. Well, you could quickly go through your lead levels if you're not careful about the cinnamon that you're doing. Other fruits and vegetable juices, not apple juice, right? So 20 parts per billion, right, at an assumed level. 10 parts per billion in apple juice, right? So dark chocolate is down here, right? It's way down the list. Cocoa powder is again, for some reason, it was measured in nanograms per gram, and then I needed to do this, which is similarly, there's a direct because of the way the metric system works, but I wanted to make it milligrams per kilogram as near as I could. The liquids can't do that directly. um, because it's a challenging. And with protein powders, there are different serving sizes. So if we actually go and look at this, right, what we do is we find that the serving size for this particular ice cream is 47 grams. And the serving size for this one is 333 grams. And the serving size for this one is 330 milliliters. And so when we look at this table, right, when we look at protein powders and shakes, it's impossible to do this normalization because the serving size varies so widely. So I just wanted to point that out, that's the reason why that's there. And so if baby root vegetable purees, you need to worry about, I mean, this is, if I'm doing pea puree for babies, maybe I want to stay away from pea purees because peas contain a lot of lead. All right, so you do need to think about it that way. We have dark chocolate, cocoa powder, and milk chocolate, and then rice and oats. And one thing that's interesting is they say dry cereal for babies, right? But it's interesting to note when it comes to high levels of arsenic concentrations, rice is really, really common. And so if you eat a lot of rice, right, you want to make sure that your rice is tested for arsenic levels, because you could be consuming a lot of inorganic arsenic when you do so, and that would be bad for you. So you do have these things. So what is the exposure vector? How do we explain it in terms of hazard and risk, right? And then we have foods, right, that are fairly commonly found in American households, and what are the ranges for how much there are. Now, this, right, so yeah, it's a lot. So you just, we need to be very, very careful about pointing out protein powders and protein shakes, right? And not thinking about what are the other things that are in our diet which contribute this. So for example, there's no attempt to say, oh, here's what we learned from our chocolate study and correlate it with our protein powder study. I mean, there's no attempt to talk about that because, oh, if you were to go and take a look at, for example, this is a more recent publication. So this is April 28th, A Guide to the Healthiest Chocolate. They do talk about heavy metals here, but you need to go take a look and say, oh, here is another article. Lead and cadmium are common in chocolate, especially organic chocolate. And what you'll do is you'll find that this is a different study from the one published in 2023. Right? Are there heavy metals in milk chocolate? This is another study. It's important to go there and understand, oh, there's a lot more here, right? To do this. I haven't taken a look at this Best Box chocolate study, but it would be interesting to know how they go about determining what the word best is. And maybe I'll do that in a future episode. I haven't really thought about that, but I will get to there. So there's that. So I also want to point out, here is a study that I reported on quite some time ago. The occurrence of heavy metals coupled with elevated levels of essential elements in chocolates, health risk assessment. This is, right, a peer-reviewed study, right, which takes a much deeper dive. And it is this study that I compared mostly against the Consumer Reports study. Right? And this one was reported July of 2024. So, and there's no reference of this study, right, in any of the updates that Consumer Reports have done to their chocolate reporting. So, unfortunately, what this all means is you need to know a lot, right, if you want to be able to go and do this. And I'm happy to go do that. I'm actually going to be writing a much deeper report that takes sort of this perspective, but it's going to be much longer, and it goes into much greater detail about many things. If you're interested in that, let me know. Put it in the comments. I'll get there. There's another study that I've been referring to, which is a multi-year heavy metal analysis of 72 dark chocolate and cocoa products in the United States that was published again in July of 2024, using these studies as comparisons for the Consumer Reports study and methodology. So really, really important to go and know that I'm not making this up. I did the research. I had help doing the research. I did not generate, for example, these tables by hand, right? I asked tools to go and generate these tables by hand. right? All right. So anyway, the report, and so when I talk about the report, what I'm talking about is this report. Protein powders and shakes contain high levels of lead. So when I talk about the report here, report recommendations: choose whole foods over protein fortified products, right? This makes sense because what makes plant-based protein powders and cocoa powder such high-risk supplements, right? Because they're concentrated. So protein powder is concentrated, and therefore, if there are any heavy metals in them, they will become concentrated in the protein powder. And the same thing is true of cocoa powder. You get rid of all the cocoa butter, you're concentrating whatever is in the non-fat solids, the powdery stuff, right? And they have higher levels, right? So, right, concerned about lead in what you eat. So here's a really, really important, an important topic that I'm going to close on. If you are concerned about lead in what you eat, what number one, know this, right? Which is that adequate calcium, iron, and zinc at the same meal can lead to lead absorption. So, if you're eating milk chocolate, right? The calcium in the milk chocolate will inhibit lead absorption. You can eat the chocolate or eat the protein powder with other things. So for example, one thing you might do is rather than have a vitamin supplement containing calcium, iron, and zinc in the morning, right? Take that vitamin supplement with your protein shake. That would be perhaps one way to help mitigate against it. So here's the description. The strongest human-relevant antagonists are the essential minerals that compete with lead for intestinal transport and binding. Again, did research. This is what the research tells me. Comes from multiple sources. I can cite them. Anyway, calcium competes, right, in a particular kind of way. Correcting iron deficiency downregulates a particular enzyme or protein and reduces lead absorption. Iron and lead compete in heme, or an essential component of blood synthesis. Increased dietary zinc and likely copper can suppress intestinal lead absorption. So, if you're going to consume a lot of protein powder and you want to consume the protein powder for one reason or another, one of the things you can do is take a supplement, which hopefully is not high in lead, but contains calcium, iron, and zinc at the same time, and that will reduce the amount of lead that is taken up by the body. And this is an important aspect of hazard versus risk, and understanding that it's not in what you eat that's important. That's not what's important. Well, it's not the only thing that's important. It is important, right? It's not only the levels of lead and things like that, which are in what you eat. What's important is how much is retained in the body, how much is metabolized, how much shows up in metabolites in your bloodstream, is stored in your bones. Right? That's the important part, right? And so you can mitigate the risk by making sure that you're not anemic, right? And they're consuming enough calcium and zinc. Maybe the protein powders, if number one, mix your protein powder with milk rather than water. Yay, there's calcium in the milk. Use calcium fortified milk, vitamin fortified milk, and that would be a way to mitigate the risk associated with the protein powder, right? Don't serve your protein powder to small children. Chances are, 6 months old you should not be doing protein enhanced shakes to babies. Just common sense kind of stuff. Hopefully it doesn't need to be mentioned. But I could imagine that some baby food manufacturer would come up with a protein enhanced formula that some parent who is just really focused on protein supplementation would say, ooh, it's got extra protein in it, must be good for a baby. Don't, right? If the protein source is from plants. If it's from collagen or fish or something like that, might be better. But the pea protein in shakes for babies, not a good idea. And then zinc and copper. So there are some other things that you might want to do. So probiotics and prebiotics, right, which support the gut microbiome. So maybe if you're using a powdered probiotic, mix it in with your shake, or you're taking a probiotic pill, that might, or prebiotic. A prebiotic fiber those are things that you can supplement your supplement with in order to reduce the likelihood that you're going to absorb or you're going to metabolize the lead. So that's something to think about. And also antioxidants. So it turns out that, chocolate's got a lot of antioxidants in it. And cocoa powder's got a lot of antioxidants. And so maybe what they're doing is they're counterbalancing. Again, all of this sort of stuff is really understanding that what is in what you're eating is part of what's important, right? But what's most important is what is retained by the body, what is metabolized by the body. So practical takeaway number one from all of this is pair any food that might contain lead with calcium and iron-rich foods, dairy, fortified alternatives, plus iron sources. You could do a capsule supplement, which contains all of these things. Make sure you've got enough zinc, maintain good gut health, which means probiotics and prebiotics. You could add some prebiotic fiber, right, which would change the texture, but would help against absorbing the lead into the body, right, and lower retention. Practical takeaway number two, at the very beginning, I said, I am not a doctor. I am not a doctor. I'm not giving medical advice. But if you are concerned, right, about the sources of lead in your body or whether or not it's an issue for you, what you need to do is you need to go and contact your doctor. You need to go contact your doctor, right, and find out. You can get tests which are specifically about lead levels in the body. There are urine tests and blood tests. You need to be careful that you have the right test for what it is you're doing. You don't want the one which is, the quick one as part of your annual screening. You want to go and get a dedicated test. May not be covered by insurance if you have it, but if you are truly concerned, talk to your doctor about it. Find out if there's any genetic predisposition, if you have any condition, for example, a kidney condition or some other thing, or some other medical concern, which the doctor is going to say you're at elevated risk. So be very careful about don't rely on my advice, right? Don't rely on some generic nutritional advice about protein supplementation. And the only thing you need to worry about is the amount of protein you get in your diet. If you're concerned about heavy metals contamination, go get a test from your doctor. Find out elevated levels of mercury, arsenic, lead, cadmium. There are specific tests for them. You can find out if you are at risk, right? And before I close out today, I do want to point out let's go to the Chocolate Life and today's post. In this post here, lead plus cadmium plus chocolate does not have to equal fear. One of the quotes which is made near the bottom of this is from a doctor who's quoted in the post, who says, should there be warning labels on chocolate bars and other products? And Dr. Magnuson, whose affiliation is further up in the post, says, no, right? Noting that lead and cadmium are present in so many foods that we would need to put a warning label on pretty much everything we eat, from soup to nuts. And so this is why I want to express, again, at the very end of today's post, that hazard and risk are not the same thing. Yes, lead is hazardous, cadmium is hazardous, arsenic is hazardous, all of these things. Water is hazardous if consumed in large enough quantities. The question is, how do you manage the risk associated with all of these things? And what's important to you? And recognizing that, protein powder may be something which is a large contributor. There may be other things in your diet which are also very large contributors. And with that, I'm done for today. I want to thank everybody much for being here. This episode of PodSafe Chocolate, like every episode of PodSafe Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of The Chocolate Life. Here's the homepage again. If you're not a member of The Chocolate Life, please go to The Chocolate Life, click on the green button. You can join. Always a free membership, right? But if you have the resources to support the work that I'm doing, there are paid membership starting at as little as $5 a month. Higher levels of membership come with them benefits of coaching and consulting hours, anywhere between 1 and 3. And the highest levels also have discount on additional consulting hours if what it is you'd like me to do is work more with you on your challenges, new product development, marketing language, and how you're positioning yourself against others, all sorts of topics. You're laying out a new facility or looking at equipment. You want somebody to evaluate your production processes. These are all things that I can help you do. And with that, I'm going to end today's show as I do every show, which is to say, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everyone, ciao.